So this is a video on the health message in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I'm bringing to light things that used to have been kept and that people have forgotten about, and we started walking a different way as science seems to grow and grow in one direction, and we seem to leave behind a lot of things, and we've forgotten many of the things that we used to know and believe. So today I'm doing my talk on garlic and cinnamon, and I'm bringing them both together because Ellen White says specifically cinnamon, and we're going to see how garlic fits into the same category, and how these are things that we should not be taking into our systems as food, one, and should not be used as something that we should be taking into our systems to help us overcome disease or sickness or anything like that. This is not God's way, and I'm just going to read one quote, and then we're going to go through the understanding of this. One quote first, and then there's a few other quotes that I'm going to read. So the first quote says, "Nothing should be put into the human system that will leave a baleful influence behind. And to carry out the light on this subject, to practice hygienic treatment, is a reason which has been given to me for establishing sanitariums at various locations or localities." So here she says, this is not supposed to happen. This is why we're starting sanitariums, because the sanitariums are going to do the work. It's going to be done with intelligence, and people will learn from these. So obviously, to understand this perfectly, we should also go and look at the sanitariums, which we'll do in a little bit. We're going to take an excerpt. It's going to be a long excerpt that I'm going to read from Harvey Kellogg's wife's book that she wrote. And this was in the beginning days. And it's going to talk about irritating spices or condiments, because they're the same thing. So I'm going to read two quotes here first from Ellen White about cinnamon. The first one, she says, "Cake was brought into our tent. I ate a small piece, and the stomach refused to retain it. It was spiced with cinnamon. If my stomach would not acknowledge this as food, but rebelled against it, what condition must these be in who partook of this food every day?" Well, let me tell you, I love cinnamon. My mom used to make a rice that we do. She'd make it with milk. It was rice with milk. We just daub on huge scoops of, I would anyway, brown sugar, sprinkle it with cinnamon, and then I preferred margarine than over butter for this dish, and do that and then make it, and it was kind of like a rice pudding without raisins or anything healthful in it whatsoever. And I just love that. Would be sick, feel terrible every time I ate it, but I loved it because it gratified the taste buds so much. So these people made cake. This was being brought to a camp meeting because she says cake kept better than pies, but she's like, it's not food, it's tree bark. It's not something man was ever given to eat. So the second quote I'm going to read is, just read this. She says, "There is a natural and a depraved appetite. Parents who have taught their children to eat unhealthful, stimulating food all their lives until the taste is perverted and they crave clay, slate pencils, burnt coffee, tea grounds, cinnamon, cloves, and spices, cannot claim that the appetite demands what the system requires." Your system doesn't require any of that stuff. "The appetite has been falsely educated until it is depraved. The fine organs of the stomach have been stimulated and burned. They have lost their delicate sensitivity. Simple, healthful food seems to them insipid. The abused stomach will not perform the work given unless it is urged by the most stimulating substances. If these children had been trained from their infancy to take only healthful food prepared in the most simple manner, preserving its natural properties as much as possible and avoiding flesh meats, grease, and all spices, the taste and appetite would be unimpaired. In its natural state, it might indicate a great degree the food best adapted to the wants of the system." So it's only when we eat properly that we want the proper things. If you get used to something, then you start craving it, especially if you start associating it with good times. You go out for hot wings, well, you have everybody, eating them. Who can eat the hottest wings? Who can take the hottest stuff? And it's associated with good times. You got challenges going on, you're eating all this stuff, and while hot, spicy wings aren't really good, the more you eat them, the more you can't taste it, and the more you crave it, because the taste that you can taste and the taste that you can't taste. And it's just amazing how your taste buds or your mind gets wired and changes, but it's mostly due to feeling. And sometimes you like these because it brings feelings to you and it's not actually the taste that you like. Anyways, that was long-winded. So right now I want to read something, and it's quite lengthy. And this is why I say sometimes we got to go to sanitariums to understand exactly what Ellen White was trying to bring about as a reform in this case. So this is written by Harvey Kellogg's wife. It's a book called Science in the Kitchen by E. Harvey Kellogg. You can still get PDFs of it. You can order ebooks, however you want. It's a really good book. I highly recommend pretty much everyone to read it or read parts of it or whatever, because it gives a good understanding for certain things on how to cook grains. It helps understand coarse vegetables. It gives a great definition of condiments or irritating spices. And that's what I'm going to read to you right now. If I can make it bigger so I can read it. By condiments are commonly meant such substances that are added to season food, to give it a relish or to stimulate appetite, but which in themselves possess no real food value. To this category belong mustard, ginger, pepper, pepper sauce, Worcestershire sauce, cloves, spices, and other similar substances. That anything is needed to disguise or improve the natural flavor of food would seem to imply either that the article used was not a proper alignment substance, or that it did not answer the purpose for which the creator designed it. True condiments such as pepper, pepper sauce, ginger, spice, mustard, cinnamon, cloves, etc., are all strong irritants. This may be readily demonstrated by their application to a raw surface. The intense smarting or burning occasioned are ample evidence of the irritating character. So an irritating spice is a food, what we consider food today, that irritates. Chilies, garlic, all those things. You put it in your mouth, it's hot, it burns. If it's hot and it burns, it's not food. That's a good warning to us that God did not create that for us to eat. Okay, I'll go back on to reading. Pepper and mustard are capable of producing powerful irritating effects, even when applied to healthy skin where wholly intact. Garlic like that too. You put garlic on your skin, 3rd-degree burns. That's how powerful that is. And these aren't as powerful as garlic. Don't worry, she'll actually mention garlic, but in a unique way. It is surprising that it does not occur to the mother who applies mustard plaster to the feet of her child to relieve congestion of the brain that an article which is capable of producing blisters upon the external covering of the body is quite capable of producing similar effects when applied to the more sensitive tissues within the body. The irritating effects of this substance upon the stomach are not readily recognized, simply because the stomach is supplied with very few nerves or of sensation. That condiments induced an intense degree of irritation to the mucous membranes of the stomach was abundantly demonstrated by the experiments of Dr. Beaumont upon the unfortunate Alexis of St. Martin. Dr. Beaumont records that when St. Martin took mustard, pepper, and similar condiments with his food, the mucous membrane of his stomach became intensely red and congested, appearing very much like an inflamed eye. This is an irritating effect of the condiment which gives occasion for the extended use. They create an artificial appetite similar to the incessant cravings of the chronic dyspeptic, whose irritable stomach is seldom satisfied. This fact regard to condiments is sufficient argument against their use, being one of the greatest causes of gluttony, since they remove the sense of satiation by which nature says, enough. Whew! That explains a lot for me. To a thorough, normal, and unperverted taste, irritating condiments of all sorts are very obnoxious. It is true that nature accommodates herself to the use with food to such a degree that they may be employed for years without apparently producing any grave effects or results. But this very condition is a source of injury, since it is nothing more or less than going to sleep, of the sentinels which nature has posted at the portal of the body for the purpose of giving warning and danger. The nerves of the sensibilities have become benumbed to such a degree that they no longer offer remonstrance against irritating substances and allow the enemy to enter into the citadel of life. The mischievous work is thus insidiously carried on year after year. By and by, the individual breaks down with some chronic disorder of the liver, kidneys, or other important internal organ. Physicians have long observed that in tropical countries where curry powder and other condiments are very extensively used, disease of the liver, especially the acute congestion and inflammation, are exceedingly common. Much more so that in countries among the nations where condiments are less freely used. A traveler in Mexico some time ago described a favorite Mexican dish as composed of layers of the following ingredients: pepper, mustard, ginger, pepper, potato, ginger, mustard, pepper, potato, mustard, ginger, pepper. The common use of such a dish is sufficient cause for the great frequency of disease of the liver among the Mexicans, noted by physicians traveling in that country. That the use of condiments is wholly a matter of habit is evident from the fact that the different nations employ as condiments articles which would be of the highest degree obnoxious to people of other countries. For example, the garlic so freely used in Russian cookery would be considered by Americans no addition to the natural flavors of food, and still more distasteful would be the asafoetida, frequently used as a seasoning in the cuisine of the Persian and Asiatic countries. The use of condiments is unquestionably a strong auxiliary to the formation of habits of using intoxicating drinks. Persons addicted to the use of intoxicating liquors are, as a rule, fond of the stimulating and highly seasoned foods. And although the converse is not always true, yet it is apparent that every thoughtful person that the use of a diet composed of highly seasoned and irritating foods institutes the conditions necessary for acquiring a taste for intoxicating liquors. The false appetite aroused by the food that burns and stings craves something less insipid than pure cold water to keep up the fever the food has excited. Again, condiments, like all other stimulants, must be continually increased in quantity or their effect becomes diminished, and this leads directly to a demand for stronger stimulants both in eating and drinking, until the problem tendency is towards the dram shop. A more serious reason why high seasoning leads to intemperance is that the perversion of the use of the sense of taste. Certain senses are given unto us to add pleasure as well as for the practical, almost indispensable use they are to us. For instance, the sense of sight is not only useful, but enables us to drink in beauty, if among beautiful surroundings, without doing us any harm. The same of music and other harmonics which may come to us through the sense of hearing. But the sense of taste was given to us to distinguish between wholesome and unwholesome foods, and cannot be used for merely sensuous gratification, without debasing or making it a gross thing. An education which demands special employment or pleasure through the sense of taste is wholly artificial. It is coming down to the animal plane, or below it rather, for the instinct and the brute creation teaches it merely to eat to live. Yet how widespread is the habit of strenuous gratification through the sense of taste. If one calls upon a neighbor, he is at once offered refreshments of some kind, as though the greatest blessing of life came from an indulged appetite. This evil is largely due to wrong education, which begins with childhood. When Joni sits down to the table, the mother says, "Joni, what would you like?" Instead of putting plain, wholesome food before the child, and taking it as a matter of course that he will eat and be satisfied, The child grows to think that he must have what he likes, whether it is good for him or not. Is it not strange that an appetite thus pampered in childhood becomes uncontrollable at maturity? For one step in gourmandization of intoxication is much shorter than most people imagine. The natural unperverted taste of a child will lead him to eat that which is good for him. But how can we expect the children to reform when their parents continually set before them examples of the matter of eating and drinking? The cultivation of taste for spices is a degeneration of the sense of taste. Nature never designed that pleasure should be divorced from use. The effects of the gratification of sense of taste differ materially from those of gratifying the higher sense of sight and hearing. What we see is gone, nothing remains but the memory, and the same is true with the sweet sounds which may reach us through their ears. But what we taste is taken into the stomach, and what is thus given us brief pleasure through the gratification of the palate must make the work in the alimentary canal for 14 hours before it is disposed of. So what we see here is that the reason why people like spices is the same reason why they like alcohol. It gives a sensation and it does different things, and a lot of it has to do with traditions of men and good times, right? Everybody likes Christmas because of food. Everybody likes Thanksgiving because of food. We all come together, we all do these food things, and whatever becomes traditional, even if it's unhealthful for you, you associate with good things, good memories, and therefore it becomes more pleasant, and then you tend to like it more. But like it said at the beginning of the quote, anything given to disguise the taste of food, right? I like potatoes, but if you don't like potatoes without milk and salt and margarine or butter on it, you're starting to disguise the taste of it, right? Do you actually like a potato? I love potatoes, and I had good memories with potatoes. I used to take potatoes that were just boiled potatoes, and I take them out, put a little salt on them, and I thoroughly enjoyed it that way. And I didn't need all those other things. But then you start adding cheeses and you start adding all these other things, and all of a sudden the relish for just plain boiled potatoes goes away. Except you might enjoy them sometimes because it brings back a lot of fond memories. And so with these irritating spices and condiments and stuff that we like to use and we like to eat, it is mostly due to not that our body wants them or craves them or that it's good for our body, but that we associate them with memories that are good. And that's just really the fact of the matter. Garlic is a very destructive thing, and people might say, well, you know what, it's an antibiotic. Well, you know what, so is arsenic, and so is whatever else. But do we need to put things into our body that kills bad things as well as good things? That's a baleful influencer in our body. And if we just think about these things with just if we start implementing all these things, then we can start understanding these things. Because as long as you refuse to give up your garlic or give up your cinnamon or whatever, right? The Bible says at the end of time, man's belly will be their God. Unless you can give those up for a time, you will not be able to understand these things. God's health message is progressive, and it gives us clear minds so we can understand what is actually written in front of us instead of justifying away the things that are just plainly written. And I remember thinking when I joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I'm like, what is the definition of an irritating spice? What is the definition of an irritating spice? Well, here we go. Plainly said, anything that you put on a sensitive organ, let alone, your regular skin, right, and burns or gives like a sensation that way, is an irritating spice. Plain, simple, and garlic's one of the worst of them. 3rd-degree burns in 3 hours or less. Take it or leave it. Truth is progressive, and that's why, even though we've done these things because we've been cultivated, it's traditional, right? The traditions of men have been leading us, but we need to follow the truth where it leads us. So now I want to read 2 last quotes to bring this all into context as to why this is important for us today. Ellen White actually says something just totally startling. She says, if the members of our churches show that they care not for the light on health reform, but to continue to walk in the light and the sparks of their own kindling, they will lie down in sorrow. And the painful part of the history is that the influence of those older church members will leaven the newly come to the faith. The Lord could not now bring many souls into the truth because the church members that have never been converted and those who were once converted but who have backslidden. What good would these unconsecrated members do to the converts? They would make of none effect the message that God has given his people to bear. Now, this last quote brings everything else into context and is beautiful. Let the pupils be impressed with the thought that the body is a temple of God in which God desires to dwell, that it must be kept pure, an abiding place of the high and noble thoughts. As in the study of physiology, they see that they are indeed fearfully and wonderfully made. They will be inspired with reverence. Instead of marring God's handiwork, they will have an ambition to make all that is possible of themselves, in order to fulfill the Creator's glorious plan. Thus they will come to regard obedience to the laws of health not as a matter of sacrifice or self-denial, but as it really is, an inestimable privilege and blessing.